what ways merit some further exploration?
It's like we're getting more in the chat.
So how to build virtual relationships, attracting and retaining talent.
What else? Others? And or if people want to comment, come off mute and just comment as you see these things come through the chat. Information overload. Andy, can you say a little bit more about that? What kind of information? Just the crush? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it is just the crush of information that gets thrown at us every day that really makes it, and that makes it very difficult to prioritize and to focus.
Right. Other comments? Other ways you're doing business that might merit some exploration? Sheila, why don't you read what we have? See if you can just read the whole group.
Time is something that often comes up. Heavy focus on growth, but not sure we have the staff or bandwidth to support it. So again, around the workload, the overload, time pressures.
Other thoughts? Let me give sort of a capture final thoughts here. So let us pause on these, and then where we're going to go now is sort of two different sets of materials. One, what blocks? What is our sort of distillation as to what blocks, both at an individual and organizational level, challenging business as usual? And then we'll give you an opportunity to connect it to BDO. And then secondly, what are some practices, what are some habits that tend to be more effective as challenging? So first, what blocks? And then second, what are some ideas about what to do about it? And let me then turn it to Sheila to begin the process of some of the blockers.
Great, thank you very much, Ken. So typically, what gets in the way of challenging business as usual are individual blockers and organizational blockers. We remain in the status quo because it becomes our ingrained pattern of doing. Stopping, relearning, and changing requires effort, time, and commitment, which we just saw in the text chat that not a lot of people have and don't have a lot of time to think about. So essentially, we've been programmed to be busy. Oftentimes, we base our value on how busy we are. And ultimately, this busyness and doing and our inability to stop and reflect on how we are doing things, or more importantly, how we could do things better, is getting in the way as business as usual. We stop at the status quo and we do what we've always done. So one of the key questions I have for the team next on the next slide is, how open-minded are you? I'm curious to know. Open-minded is your willingness to consider ideas, opinions that are different or new to your own. So very quickly, if I can ask the group that in the chat, you rate yourself, 10 being extremely open-minded and 1 not being open-minded at all. How would you rate how open-minded do you believe you are? So we got a couple of 6s. We have an 8, 8, 8, 9, 7, 8, 8, 9, 10.
Wow.
Okay. 7. 7. Well, pretty open-minded group. Good to hear. That's a good way to start a session.
Should we turn it over to whoever had the 10, Sheila?
Yeah.
Well, and Sheila, I think my 10 is because being new to Detroit and being new to the practice and just kind of learning what we've done in the past that has worked, but also what we've done in the past that maybe hasn't worked is part of the reason I'm putting the 10 is I've been very open to that feedback and actually asking for it. And there's been a lot of constructive feedback provided, and we've been trying to change some things on the audit side specifically, but as a practice as well. And yeah, I would say for sure, since I got here in July, I would hope most people would think that 10's legitimate. Like I've actually,
a couple of years from now, that might go down. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but I definitely feel like if you're not closer to a 10, then you probably, public accounting would be very difficult to be in because it's continuously changing at this point. And obviously we can get more into that as we talk through this, but yeah, I feel like we all should probably be shooting for that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good point. Well, let's move on to the next slide. And it might be interesting for you to know that a series of studies were done with thousands of Americans to correlate findings between open-minded people and the way they work and they live. And a key finding was that most people overestimated themselves. As a matter of fact, 95% of people rated themselves more open than average. And I actually think we might have had that in the text, which of course cannot be true, because if we were all so open-minded, this would certainly be a different world. So the key takeaway here, and I think, Kevin, you touched on it, is that most leaders don't know how much of a blind spot they may or may not have. And the question to ask yourself on an ongoing basis is, how open-minded are you really? And to put yourself out there and really challenge that and look at things differently and understand that you may have some assumptions that may or may not be true. So now we're going to move on to Jim walking us through some of the things that get in the way of change blockers on an individual level. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Sheila. I think we can read this change blockers as also the things that sustain business as usual. So why do we stay in business as usual for as long as we do, and what's blocking that change? As both Ken and Sheila have said to this point, probably the biggest issue is busyness. It's just it's hard. And those of you who've been in and around transformation or change management or read a book on it, somehow authors tend to say, here are the 5 steps, the 10 steps to change. Those of you who've been integrally involved or intimately involved in change know it's absolutely messy. It's not linear. It doesn't ever happen the way you want it to happen, despite the best plans you have. So this is difficult. And in a busy environment where there are a huge number of competing demands for your time, it's very hard to do. And then I would say the second part of that, which comes from it, is if in fact business as usual is working. In other words, you're achieving success with it, where's the motive to change? And I'm going to use a term, I don't mean it to apply directly here, but there builds in many organizations an institutional arrogance. We got this figured out. Look at our top line growth, look at our bottom line growth, look at our distribution to partners. This is all working very well. We're acquiring new clients, we're retaining at a great rate. Don't rock the boat. And it's not as overt or as obvious as that, but subtly, we must be in order to grow the way we're growing, in order to be as successful as we are, we must be doing something well. And so there's a very strong tendency to keep things the way they are. And that arrogance kind of takes over, which gives us a little time to question or challenge. This is, I'm hats off to you for taking 2 hours to do this. Let me add this, because this comes at a cost. 2 hours comes at a cost. And if you're doing year ends with your clients, it comes at a very significant cost. So the competing demands for your time make it very difficult to pull away and actually do a little bit of questioning. We hope that whether we do it directly or whether you're doing it in the back of your mind or quietly by yourself, that you're actually taking this time to really question what it is that you're doing. Another point I'd like to make is that we're really, if busyness is a big part of all this, then our need for efficiency is also a major driver in this. There's a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by a Nobel psychologist named Daniel Kahneman, and he really talks about the fact that we're hardwired to be efficient. And in a simplistic way, if we had to think about putting the left foot in front of the right foot in front of the left to walk, or, okay, I have to be conscious, I have to breathe, I inhale, exhale, but carry that through most of what we do is our need to be efficient, our need to operate in a complex world. We need to put many, many things on autopilot. His notion is that that we have two ways of thinking, that which I just talked about, which is thinking fast, autopilot. I recognize something in the environment. It's almost reflexive. I act in a particular kind of way. The benefit of that is it saves time and energy, mental energy, in order to work on the wicked problems, the ones for which they don't occur very often. There's no pattern of making those kinds of decisions. The difficulty is that the thinking fast overtakes the thinking slow. We don't give ourselves time we put too many things in this is automatic. I can put this on autopilot. I've seen this before. What I did last time worked. I'm going to do it again. So this whole thing really boils down to, I think, a couple of things. One is busyness, and the second one is efficiency. And we're so driven and consumed by busyness. And our response to that, both hardwired and externally demanded, is that we become really efficient. And one of the questions I'd ask you to think about in the back of your mind is, where do you let efficiency drive out effectiveness? Where do you put things into a routine that can be done very, very easily, low energy, low input requirements to maximize output somehow? And where do you pull back? What decisions do you pull back on? What actions do you pull back on and really give it some time? I think people overestimate how much cerebral activity they actually engage in every day. It seems like, I know your brain's tired at the end of every day, I get that, but it may be another form of fatigue. We're going to drill down on the last two bullets here. We're going to drill down on those in a minute. I want to talk about biases, and Ken's going to talk about the nervous system, and this all comes together. So we're bundles of biases. And biases come into play when we have to fill in gaps between what we know and what we need to know to act and make decisions. But over time, those biases, which are the best we've got at a point in time, get solidified somehow. One of the first and most obvious is confirmation bias. Ken talked a little bit about that in terms of his dealing with Israelis and the Palestinian Authority. I would bring it a little closer to home, maybe over the last couple of years, without creating anything incendiary here, as if you're a CNN watcher, maybe watching Fox is a difficult thing to do. If you're a Fox watcher, CNN is a very difficult thing to do. We tend to look for those things that confirm what we already know. And again, the energy required to sort of, how do I incorporate a very different point of view? The energy required to do that is fairly significant. So I tend to look for things that confirm what I already know. There's a commitment bias, which says that's kind of the doubling down what I've already done. So I commit to past behaviors. Another phrase that sort of falls into this category, I put good money after bad. The studies that have been done on people doubling down or putting good money after bad are replete. If I move over to the other side, the Dunning-Kruger effect, a little bit related to the how open do we think we are, and everybody thinks they're above average. The Dunning-Kruger effect sends, people tend to think they're smarter and more capable than they really are. And I believe, let me challenge you a little bit here. I think people who are in the business of delivering expertise find that to be even more true than others. In other words, if you define your business as I provide expertise on tax, insolvency, audit, advice, I need to think of myself as an expert, and nothing stops learning, questioning, really drilling down to another piece of point of view other than believing you're an expert. And then related to that is cognitive entrenchment. You have so much specialized knowledge, and it is around this notion of expertise, is that you take for granted things that you really should question. And then a big one, a really big one that's rears its head in very different kinds of ways, but is this notion of loss aversion. That loss is actually very painful. And if I move into something either I don't know, can't do, might fail at, I have a tendency to want to pull back. We've only picked out, I mean, these cognitive biases, this list could go on to 100 and be broken down into a lot. But what we're going to get to later on is one of the best ways to begin to, what do you do about this tendency to keep business as usual going, is really, truly understand these biases and engage in practices that enforce yourself into being less susceptible to their dysfunctional effects. So Ken's going to talk about another one of the nervous system impacts on this as well. Ken?
So to give you, I don't know how many of you know much about neurophysiology, neuroscience, but there have been over the past decade or so tremendous advances in understanding our neurophysiology, how we think, how we behave. This is a enormously brief picture of the autonomic nervous system. And this comes from polyvagal theory. And if people are interested, we can send them links to it. But the essence of it is as follows. As individuals, our nervous system tends to be in one of three states, either ventral vagal, which you can sort of call safe and social. I'm engaged, I'm at ease, I'm empowered, I'm connected, I'm creative, I feel safe, I feel collaborative. It is obviously when I am there from a nervous system perspective that I can raise a difficult idea. I can ask that extra question. I'm comfortable saying, oh, hey, I had a crazy idea to do X, Y, and Z. All right? Nervous system state 1, safe, social, ventral vagal. Nervous system state 2, fight, flight, the technical term sympathetic activation. I somehow feel threatened, right? Now, I'm not, you see the picture of the tiger. I'm obviously not 10 million years ago and there's a saber-toothed tiger looking at me, but I'm worried about whether I'm going to deliver to the client. Or I have a presentation I'm about to give to a senior manager and I'm worried about it. Or someone has just said something which sort of makes me diminish. I get worried about their view of me. And there is a physiological response. Cortisol gets released, adrenaline maybe gets released. For those people who track things like heart rhythms, I have now an incoherent heart rhythm. In safe social, my heart rhythm is coherent. In fight, flight, sympathetic activation, I'm agitated, frustrated, incoherent heart rhythm, cortisol release. I'm in a different state, right? When I am running or when I am fighting, I will be less likely to be creative, to be collaborative. Nervous system state 3, I'm just overwhelmed. Someone said, there's just too much information coming at me. There are too many demands. I have too much on my plate. I literally shut down, right? I'm numb, I'm collapsed. I might be sitting at my house at 11 o'clock at night saying, boy, I'm alone. I'm by myself at this firm, etc. And then the question to you, and again, if people are interested, we can talk further about it, is recognition of which of these nervous system states you're in can help you challenge business as usual. If you are shut down, it's just not worth trying, right? Why would I challenge anything? It's just not worth it, right? And it's not just something happening cognitively, it is your nervous system is in a different state. When I'm in fight flight, again, I will likely be less creative. Now, I might have a lot of energy, but again, less light if I'm running from the meeting, if I'm running away, less likely to be creative. And again, the question then becomes, do I have any awareness of where I am? Do I have an ability to move back to safe and social? I'm managing a team. Can I lead my team back there? And again, when I hear, and we work with enough people in enough industries, there's some argument that people say, look, I live in sympathetic activation every day, all day long. I'm in sort of fight, flight, frantic, anxious, information coming at me, et cetera, et cetera. And again, the fight, flight, the dorsal vagal, the shutdown, blockers to being able to challenge safe and social. And again, let me stop if there are questions, or we'll go forward. I don't know if there are additions from my colleagues.
Well, the only point I would make, Ken, is I think this is very important, not only on a personal basis, but for your teams as well, as you're trying to encourage diverse perspectives and getting people to challenge business as usual. You want to create that safe social environment, the top one, so people are feeling engaged, at ease, empowered, and connected.
Do you have any suggestions on how to do that? Like any tactics or, real world examples of how to create that environment?
So a couple comments, and then again, let's get the first thing is you've got to be aware of where you are, right? Because look, Amy, the fight flight is contagious, right? So if I, as the leader, am agitated, right, that is contagious to my team. So the first point is, what is your individual repertoire? And then maybe you have people you work with that can help you, but using the sort of more technical term, how do I self-regulate? How do I get back in safe and social? Because if you can't get there, it's hard for you to create that state. Now, what are the classic, incredibly simple operational ways of getting back to safe and social? Number one, breath, right? Number one, you got to recognize you're in fight flight or you're in dorsal vagal. And then number one, after recognition, the classic is breath. And I don't have any idea how much any of you breathe and or have taken any courses in it, but rhythmic, smooth, belly, body breathing is that which is recommended. If you really want to be an advanced breather, a longer exhale than an inhale. 3 beats in, 4 beats out. 3 beats in, 4 beats out actually physiologically changes you. All right. So the first and most concrete, Amy, is breath. But then other people have different ways of doing this. And again, I don't know how other people deal with it. Some people go back to safe and social by exercising, right? Some people, they let it out, right? They're frustrated and anxious. They go into a room and they yell. Other people do jumping jacks. Some people come out of this by connecting with others, right? They need someone to calm them down. And again, different of you will get back to safe and social in different ways, but it all starts with, do you recognize you're not there? And then do you have an individual repertoire to get you there? I mean, I don't know if that's responsive, but that's sort of recognition first, and then different tricks for different folks. And again, I don't know what other people do to get back up there.
At a team level, you can have an exhaustive list, but some of the more simple things are making time for your team. One of the things I see many leaders do, particularly in professional services, if things get busy, meetings get busy, they'll cancel time with their direct reports or reschedule. And that sends a message and a lack of connection or empowerment. Getting to know your team, particularly in today's environment, at a different level. Listening, so crucial. Ensuring you know where people are at, how their day is going. So some of those smaller everyday tactics go a long way. But to Ken's point, you have to start off with yourself. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself so you can help others get to that state.
Kevin, were you going to make a comment?
Yeah, thanks for noticing that. So I actually have to jump off for a client meeting at 11, but I think this slide is really impactful. I feel like a lot of times when I'm in, I guess I didn't put it in these categories, but when I'm talking with somebody and they're in the fight or flight stage or even in the shutdown stage, which does occur in public accounting, as much as we want to say it doesn't. It is really hard to kind of get somebody to buy into changing or doing something differently, or it's just not going to be a productive conversation. But if I've noticed, if I'm having a one-on-one or even a team meeting and everybody's more in a safe social kind of activation mode in their mind, there is a lot more engagement, there's a lot more empowerment, there's a lot more willingness to kind of connect and change. And the more we can kind of be in that safe social, I guess you could say, zone, the better off we are. But I do think it is, because public accounting is naturally stressful, especially during busy season. There's a lot of client demands in a short period of time, and everybody's running around trying to get a lot of work done. But I get real concerned. My biggest concern, I think, with running the practice is to make decisions based on numbers and metrics and growth and things that don't necessarily truly matter to people, because obviously we got to do all those things, and I get judged based on that, and so do others on this call. But at the end of the day, if people aren't feeling safe and social, and if they don't feel a connection to what we're trying to accomplish, and if they don't feel like this is bigger than themselves, I think we lose employee engagement. We definitely lose people wanting to do this for the long term. We can't retain our team. We can't attract new team members. Like Amy Whipple had said, that's something that's really important. And this slide's really impactful. I think this is something I kind of screenshot, and I don't know if we're going to get the slides later, but I think I am going to kind of mention this to my team, just because this content's really good. I think a lot of people are in these mindsets, they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing,
Kevin,
Kevin, is, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Kevin, I think you're spot on. I wanted to add to that real quick, that one thing that I think is really difficult, at least this is difficult for me, I don't know if others have the same difficulties, is one, noticing when you're in each one of these. Hopefully we're not that last one, right? But if you're in the fight or flight, like recognizing that self-awareness of when you're in it, because like you said, at busy times of the year, or we may be frantic because of how much work we're trying to get done in one day, just being able to recognize which of these boxes that we're in, let alone what our audience is in, or our coworkers. So that, I think, is really a difficult one that I find that I try to pay attention to, but I'm not always successful at doing it.
Yeah, and I kind of have a personal example, but last night my wife was more in fight or flight or shutdown because I hadn't done the dishes in a week, and she made that very clear to me that was something that I wasn't meeting expectations on. So I spent about an hour last night, real late, doing dishes and making sure things look real nice. And then when she got up this morning, I got a kiss on the cheek, and it just seemed like she was way more in safe social. So it's a small example, personal example, I guess, but it's the same sort of thing with your work colleagues. If they're in a mode of thinking that isn't productive, but then you can show them with actions and not just words that you're going to try to change the narrative and make it better for them. I do feel like that could change their perspective on what mode they want to be in, and make them feel differently. So I guess I got to fall off for that client call, but this is really good content, and sorry I have to leave so early.
Glad you were able to join us for even the hour, Kevin. And
I would make one other comment around this, is that
Thanks, JP.
although we're presenting this as kind of a list, they're all interrelated. So you imagine if you start to get busy, you've got a ton of information. You got to make some choices about what you attend to and what you don't tend to, and you leave some things behind. It starts this autonomic nervous system moving and maybe in a dysfunctional direction. So I'd encourage you to think of all these change blockers that we're talking about as a system. And Amy, I'd go back to your question about what do you do about it? Well, go back and look at the busyness. Is there stuff we're doing we just don't need to do, or it's adding such low value, or we're making assumptions about where value is actually being created and it's not, that we can start it that way. So it's very personal at one level, but it's also very organizational at another level.
Jim, I would like to just chime in on this too. If we're in our safe social mode as advisors and consultants to our clients, I mean, obviously we can try to recognize the fight or flight mode or the shutdown mode for our colleagues and figure out how to get them to the safe social so that everybody's working more collaboratively, feeling good about the space that they're in. But I think this is also an opportunity for the team to recognize this in our clients too. I mean, you might encounter a client that is in fight flight mode, and they've got, team issues, they've got deadlines. And that kind of goes to, I think, the firm's teachings that we're trying to kind of create into our DNA of like the go-giver mentality of like helping. And so I think like if we're thinking about maybe they're, short with us or abrasive, or they're stressed about a deadline, or there's something that's happened, find that as an opportunity to actually add value to
Right.
that relationship.
Great point.
Yep,
Great point.
excellent.
I think it's, I think it's also,
Go ahead.
I think it's also, maybe I saw someone else made a comment earlier on about just the firm, the firm's really focused on growth, right? And I think that's great, but someone made the point that, well, we can grow, but we don't have the capacity, we can't get the work done.
Yep.
So I think that kind of also goes to maybe the growth, being in growth mode, we're pushing so hard, we do have to realize when our clients just don't have time to take on something. So it's kind of along the same lines of what Amy said. So I'll just leave it at that. And I just wanted to recognize that, because that's not always something I feel like we as a firm probably step back and say, hey, it's time to kind of, maybe pause for a little bit.
Yep.
Thank you for challenging. That to me seems like a sacred cow you just challenged, which is awesome. I appreciate you opening up that opportunity for people to think and talk about that, Andy.
Yep. It's great.
The last thing I was going to say about this, which again, let me just highlight it again, is this is the nervous system. So this is not just in people's heads, if that makes sense. And, Andy, you talked about recognizing it. I sometimes ask people, do you know physically, can you tell me what are the physical sensations associated with fight flight? And some people go, oh, absolutely. I feel, blood coming into my cheeks. I feel a tightness in my neck. Other people have almost no physical awareness, but this is your system, right? It's not like you can think your way out of this, right? You've got to act your way out of it, listen your way out of it, do something. There are different paths out of this, but just recognize that this literally means your nervous system is hijacked. And without going through all the details of it, when you are in fight flight, as an example, you are less smart. So as an example, if someone in front of you is angry, irritated, anxious, they will be less able to understand a complex concept, right? So you might have a need to, how do I move them before we go? All right, we should probably go forward from here.
Yep. Thank you,
to
Ken.
the organization side.
Yep. Yeah. So we intentionally led with talking about change as individuals, because unless you're motivated to do something differently and start with yourself, not much is probably going to change, right? Many of us are guilty of wanting to change others around us and organizations without first understanding ourselves, like we just did on the slide before this, and then putting that into action to behave differently. So that is an important focus for us and for you as a team, I hope. But many times there are organizational blockers that get in the way. Once you've made that commitment and you try to do things differently, you have to be conscious of the things that might put a drag on the new behaviors. And it's up to a leadership team to address these as a collective, to say they're getting in the way of what we're hoping to do as an organization. So the top one talks about leaders unknowingly discouraging curiosity, openness, exploration, and innovation. It's interesting. Some of the research shows that there's probably at least a 20% gap between what leaders think they're encouraging in the organization and what employees actually receive about being open and taking the time to be curious. So there's a significant gap, right? They think they say it's okay, yet they say, get that done, right? There's no time for the other stuff and let's focus and move on. So there's a bit of a mixed signal sometimes unconsciously, right, by leaders in the organization. Many times the culture, system, structures will reinforce the status quo, right? We preach and talk with our clients and others about repeatability, scalability, right? Find your groove, do more of, do it better, faster, and get there quicker than other organizations. But as you do that and create systems to be able to scale, right, it ignores other things that may be happening around that. And sometimes you miss other opportunities by not paying attention and going too deep, too fast. Success and growth can reduce the motivation to change. Many times companies will say, we're on a roll, right? We're meeting our goals again this year, both on the top line and the bottom line. Why take a chance and tamper with that formula, right? It could take us, derail us from the good path that we're on. Not many have the foresight to say, but is this sustainable, right? It's not just about today and tomorrow. Are we building something for the next 3 to 5 years, right? Where we're not going to burn people out along the way. So there is a need to think about that and look around the corner a little bit in order to start to address these change blockers. Risk aversion, we talked about this at an individual level, but sometimes it's in the culture where there's such a hustle that people feel reluctant to take the personal risk of raising their hand and saying, could we stop for just a second? Because I've got a question to ask that may or may not be important, right? And many times you'll find that if they had to muster the courage to ask that question, that it is important. And they just felt a little bit sheepish about bringing it up in the organization. As leaders, you can create norms where you ask them to do that routinely versus them having to get out of their comfort zone each time they feel like they need to ask what could be a meaningful question. There's such a need for speed and efficiency, which Jim talked about, that sometimes deepens the patterns in organizations. As those grooves get deeper, many times it'll create silos. You know, the expertise gets better in those silos. You do things more efficiently, faster. So in some ways, you can serve clients better by being more responsive, but there's a price in that sometimes you're not keeping your head up enough to see where it might be time to pause and take a different look at things. And then finally, the stakeholder demands, you know, from a public perspective, from a community perspective, there's such an intense focus on business leaders today to do things and do them immediately that not a lot of organizations take the longer look, right? There is a bit about meeting your immediate goals, but also being conscious of, are we going to be here as a type of organization we want to be for the longer term? So I don't know if there are certain of those that resonate for you, for your organization. I'd be interested in hearing whether there's some that pop up for you. And what we'll do on the next slide, hopefully this one breakout will go a little bit smoother, but what we're going to ask you to do, let's see, is go into breakouts. And at this time, we'd like to bring the two pieces together to talk about, as individuals and as an organization, what are your top change blockers? So each of us are going to go into 4 separate groups with you to have that conversation, and we'll ask you to appoint a spokesperson in the group. So when we come back, you can identify the themes that have come up and ideally hit the top 2 to 3 in those categories, so you can start to coalesce this for your organization. Are there questions on that? Ken's going to help us with the breakouts, but I just want to make sure that we're clear first on what the intent is with this conversation. Any questions? No? Okay, I think we're good. And we'll take, I should have said this as well, we'll take about 10 minutes in the breakout. So please be conscious of time when you go in there, and then be prepared to have someone report out when you come back. We'll take another 10 minutes to have the bigger conversation, just to be able to share what you had in your, what you came up with in your smaller group. Okay?
So I'm going to open the rooms.
Please do. Ken, you want me in room 1 again, right? We might be the only ones back.
Got us back super early.
Yeah. Well, it's 11:18, so I saw the 8 minutes and then I saw the 2-minute warning. Maybe we're just more compliant than the rest, huh?
I'm sure they'll slip back in momentarily.
They're testing us to see how disruptive we want to be. Hi, Sheila.
Hey there. Are we all back?
I
think we are.
like it. Thank you. So what I'd like to do at this point is go around and have the groups share just some key points that came up, themes, insights that you experienced in your group. So Ken, who was it in your group that's the spokesperson?
I don't know who the spokesperson is. Oh, great. Yes.
I can let you know.
Please.
So we talked obviously about both the individual and organizational aspect. I think one of the biggest things on the organizational is the competing priorities that, are going on, and with growth, quality, staffing. There's so many changes going on, with the approach and technology. It results in some challenges and mentoring and teaching the newer staff coming in from that aspect. And then also just the new generation of staff and what they're looking for, what motivates them versus maybe some of us who have been in the profession for a long time is different, and how that transpires. From an individual standpoint, it was, again, competing priorities, trying to manage, the demands of the profession and what we need to do. And then also, our personal life. And then just in regards to the balance of having like so many things and shifting gears constantly and going to different meetings and different clients and different calls for prospects, and then at the end of the day you're kind of like, what do I need to work on now?
Yeah.
After all of that. So I think from that standpoint that gets a little overwhelming.
Yeah,
So
and there's a friction cost every time you change gears, right? There's time and energy to go from one mode to the next. So thank you, those are great. Who would like to go next as another spokesperson for one of the groups?
I'll go.
Paul, thank you.
Our group pretty much focused on the organizational blockers. Overall, there's a message that we're spending too much time focusing only on the short term rather than on a long-term focus. Everything's so results oriented that we need to really step back and take a look at the big picture. And everything also comes back down to not enough time. We're too busy to be creative or innovative. And we also think there's a lot more good ideas at the lower levels, but we're probably only focusing on the folks that are on the call here. We just don't have time to even talk to the lower levels to see what they're thinking, and they're just focusing only on projects. So
Got it.
And then one of the overall industry blockers we thought was just possible burnout, losing people to other firms, just because if you're not controlling the amount of work that they're doing, they could get burned out and maybe go somewhere else.
Got it.
That was it.
Thank you. Anything else, Paul? No? Okay, thank you.
Add one more thing, Paul, that I was thinking about when we were talking about this, and as you just mentioned it, maybe the industry blockers, the stigma of the industry. We already know public accounting has a certain stigma about working a lot of hours. To what extent does it continue to get worse? So I think that could be a stigma that continues to grow.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I mean, it's not just the reality of the burnout, right? It's the people based on the reputation, not even wanting to step into that and take a chance on having to deal with that. So you get hit with a double whammy on that. Okay, thank you. Who's the next spokesperson? And then I'll go to Brendan last, who's speaking for our group. Did I miss one?
It was our group, Ed, and I didn't follow directions. I said I'd share with the team what we came up with, but the team said they'd back me up. So
Great,
And
thanks,
the
Sheila.
goal, on an individual level, time, schedule, busyness, availability of resources, and that reactional nature really put people on, this cycle where stopping to question and reflect on business as usual and how it could change became an issue. On an organizational level, this friction piece that you talked to, so the start and stop of initiatives and projects, and not really having a clear direction on what's next. The focus on certain metrics and the changing evolutionary new thinking of the people side. Another point was what's gotten the organization to this point and for the last decade has been very successful. And the thought is that, if we do it 4 times more, we'll be 4 times more successful. But obviously that gets into the cycle of resources. How do we get this done, which becomes a challenge? And so, an opportunity to rethink that the past success won't get us to future success.
Yep.
And another piece was, and this was a good one, it was a strength, that BDO is extremely good at divisional cross collaboration, cross-functional collaboration. However, that's something that they could take to the next level where they could really, take advantage and leverage that strength.
Okay, so good, but could be better. Is that the message on that?
Well, it's great and it's a strength. So how do you,
Leverage it.
leverage it?
Got it.
Yeah.
Better
Pete,
said.
did I do okay? Did I capture the thinking?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Brendan, would you like to share?
Sure. Clearly, the time pressures, keeping up with demands was a big piece, both on the individual and organizational side. People have touched on that. The other big organizational one we talked about, similar to what Marjorie touched on, but just the ongoing standardization of various practices. And, the more we have specific technologies for specific things or specific ways of doing certain things, it does make it harder. If we do want to change something, you wind up with kind of various groups of people that can do certain tasks really well, but maybe not everybody knows exactly how it works or how we would change it if we wanted to change it. So we think that's a challenge. And then on the individual side, aside from the time stuff, the biggest thing was people talked about, at an individual level, how willing are people or reluctant are people to bring an idea forward and push it really hard, right? Either because, you wonder, do you really have enough experience? Do you really know all the background behind an idea to really push that hard on it? Or are you always thinking to yourself, well, if it's just me coming up with this, does it really make sense to push that hard? And then also just kind of a ongoing question of something, right? If do I really want to be the one that pushes that hard on something, given that we've been pretty successful? Why do I want to be the one that takes on trying to make a drastic change with something? Then I take on the pressure of it, take on the burden of it, versus just if we stay the status quo, we're doing pretty well. Maybe it's not worth pushing that hard.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I would add there were 2 dimensions to that, right, Brendan? The first was, do I want to be the one who potentially looks dumb, right, by asking an innocent or naive question? And secondly, do I want to take the burden of having to do something with that, right? So it sounded like it was a double no-win in some cases for people that thought they might have ideas on how to do it differently. So I'm interested from the group, now that you've heard the other groups report in, is there anything that you found intriguing, surprising, that stimulates you to additional thinking? I mean, there were some common themes, but were there things that came up that you didn't expect?
One of the things that I'm sorry to butt in here, but we were just at the end of our group, we were kind of talking about what does life at BDO look like 5 years from now if you don't change? If you're still doing the same things in the same way 5 years from now, where do you think you're vulnerable competitively? Where will you be adding significantly less value than you are right now? So I'm not sure that we've gone out to that point of really saying, business as usual is a problem or an issue somehow. So challenge the group to think a little bit about, if you look the same 5 years from now as you do today, what do you look like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks, Jim, for adding that. Yeah. Any other observations from the group? Yeah. Okay. So you think it's a fair summation of where you're at? Can't speak to the individually, but organizationally, those points that were brought up, I heard speed at which the business is moving, the complexity of changing environment, both with the labor market and the competing demands in the organization, the changing in gears, right? Going from one thing to the next, and the challenge of potential burnout for the organization, given the length of time that at which you've been running at a pretty fast pace.
Ed, I'd like to chime in there real quick, Jim, just to kind of follow up on your point, like, what do we look like 5 years from now? I mean, I think one of the things that I've been hearing is just the importance of innovation, you know, thinking differently, technology. And in our group, we talked about that and how with all the change, it does kind of cause exhaustion. But if we don't change, you know, we're not going to grow as a firm. We're not going to grow as people. And I guess kind of learning and kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone and pushing, you know, yourselves, like, with all the stuff that still is the daily work,
Right.
is where I think there's a lot of challenge, but, you know, the importance of doing so.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Amy. Thank you. So it may be a sequence, right, where you have to actually create space for people by supporting it technologically or getting more efficient in the short term in order to create some headspace, right, to or room for people to innovate more if they'd like to. Interesting. Okay. Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point, I think, on rethink thinking. So let me go back to the screen share.
Great. So now we're going to take a look at what we could do about the blockers and how individually and as an organization we can look at it differently. So the first step as leaders is really to look within and rethink your thinking. As you approach your everyday, give some thought to the following questions. You know, what assumptions are underlying my current thinking approach? You know, if you keep saying that you're too busy, you don't have the time, chances are you're too busy and you won't have the time. What are the implications of change and no change? I think Jim brought this up, which is an interesting conversation. Continue to look at what the blockers are for you personally and at an organizational level. And how could you think and approach things differently? Spend some time reflecting on that. And then finally, it's about testing and experimentation. Test your ideas. Doesn't have to be a full-blown organizational implementation, but test your ideas in a way that you can see whether they'll work and whether they'll stick. So assumptions occur when we accept something as true or certain without any proof. They're often self-imposed and are hard to recognize, often because they're so embedded in our everyday. So our assumptions impact our fundamental understanding of problems or opportunities. And it's a way that stops us or blocks us from change because we're assuming that it is what it is. So we're going to look at a couple of quick examples, case studies of where organizations or industries have questioned their assumption and they opened up the doors to possibilities. So for many years, the design of women's swimsuits was constrained by the use of certain fabric that held up in salty or chemically treated water because women swam in their bathing suits. Then someone decided to test that assumption that women swam in bathing suits. And through their research, they had found that about 85% of women's swimming suits never got wet. And from that, what happened was they questioned the assumption, and that opened a whole bunch of possibilities. So they, for swimsuit designers, there was a whole different approach for retailers. And today, for the men in the audience, you might not know this, but you can actually buy a swimsuit that's dry clean only. And it's a significant industry. That's an older example, but something a bit more new is Airbnb. Started out in 2008 when the founders realized that they could make a quick buck if they rented an air mattress in their apartment for a big conference that was happening in San Francisco. The idea then evolved to a website where others could do that and provide cheaper accommodations for tourists and visitors. And then ultimately, fast forward to today, they have actually revolutionized the industry. They actually put a basic assumption that we all had as kids, that you needed an established, reputable hotel to provide accommodations for out of the town visitors. And we know that that's not the case anymore. So the key to these case studies is just to show you that sometimes assumptions are so ingrained and embedded in what we do. And it's those who take the time and the courage to challenge the assumption and think about things differently that really creates opportunities. So now as a team, we're going to go back into a breakout activity where we're going to have the opportunity to take a challenge that we've heard quite a bit in this conversation. And we also had an opportunity to speak to a couple of you before the session on attracting and retaining talent, which seems to be a challenge, not only for you, but based on my clients across many industries. And we're going to put you in breakout groups, and you're going to think about 3 out of these 5 questions. So the first one is, what assumptions underlie your current thinking and approaches to the attraction of talent and retention of talent? What are the implications to BDO if you change or if you don't change your approach or thinking? And then finally, brainstorming how you could think about this differently, and how can you challenge your thinking and the status quo in place right now. So with that, Ken, if you could put us into groups again, we'll ask for a spokesperson, and I'll follow directions this time, and looking forward to hearing the outcomes of the conversation.
And let's make this just 5 minutes. So this has to be just a quick chat, and give me just one more second to move someone around here. I'm going to move. So just move. Hold on just one little second. Move to room 1. All right, I'm going to open the rooms here. And again, we'll just do a quick breakout.
Great.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Andy, you have an invitation or not?
I'm going to go to 4. I'm just looking to see where the others are.
Yeah, I'm looking at Andy first. Okay, great.
Where are you going to 2 then?
I'm actually, I'm going to worry about the timing here and managing people. So
okay.
Let's just, before you go, let's just talk about time here. It's 20 minutes, 25 minutes up.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
We're going to come out of here. Yeah, I mean, we're going to come out of here in 5 minutes. And then Jim should give his 2 slides, and then you need to just poll the group.
Right.
Right. So it's going to maybe 5 minutes. So
yeah,
who is doing the debrief of this conversation?
I thought Sheila was.
So then Sheila's got to be done
in 5.
It's got to be a 5-minute debrief. All right. So I will sort of ping her on that. All right. Yeah, I'm more worried about the timing here.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Good. Okay. Oh my God.
Okay, then.
What a punctual group.
I think Kent's got enormous power.
I think he does too.
So Sheila, 5 minutes. And then Jim, 5 minutes, and Ed, 5 minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
Good to go.
See?
3-5.
So David from our group was a spokesperson. Do you want to start us off, David?
Yeah. So, from attracting and retaining talent, I think, we used to always rely on a traditional model of campus recruiting, bringing in new hires through campus recruiting and having to progress through the ranks of BDO. We've had lately been having a lot of attrition, which I think is industry wide. And so we've had to go more non-traditional ways of attracting and retaining talent with experienced hires, non-traditional accounting employees, doing somebody that might not have been at a firm, but they were doing something else, but might have an accounting background, or, from our advisory practice perspective, thinking outside the box and bringing in different experiences to fill those roles. And then I think one of the other things that we're doing is trying to, talking to Angela at her prior firm, they had kind of already been doing this. So maybe it's one of those things where we're trying to kind of catch up with some of our larger competitors, but creating a better work experience. I think we've gotten away from just having a job and having a career to making that job and career an experience for the individuals. And I think that's what especially what our younger staff really want that as well. They want it to be an experience, and that's it's almost like I think our offices now are all open floor plan, all that kind of stuff. Well, the tech companies in the west side of the nation have been doing that for years. They've been doing that for years in Europe and that kind of stuff, and we've kind of caught up. So we've tended to be reactionary in that regard and not industry leaders. So I think that's got to be something that maybe we have to change to become industry leaders in making a better work experience for people, and in giving them the power to make their own schedules and work from home if they need to. Which again, we're doing that, especially now because of COVID. All right, we've had to really modify how all of our employees are getting their jobs done. I think I captured everything.
Astrid, would you like to go next for our group?
Yeah, and I can use David's comments as a segue. So from a retention standpoint, we talked about that the hurdle seems to be that David described it as that work experience. Yet when we are talking with folks who resign or are looking for another opportunity, the reaction seems to be always about money, promotions, so level, and compensation. And that's what we then fall back to. And we are not looking at things like workload and different things. On the other hand, we are meanwhile so afraid that we are losing more people that we are trying to make everything we can happen to keep them here. So going so far that we are afraid of providing constructive feedback where performance is lacking or where responsibilities are not handled correctly, where we have in a lot of cases higher levels compensating for the shortfalls of our younger professionals or lower levels, because we don't want to lose yet another person. So the question there is that really the right approach to go forward? First of all, is that really keeping us people? One of our comments there was, okay, aren't we hurting some of the folks who would rather have a real mentor and really constructive feedback to get better and improve, yet they may not be getting it because we are so careful.
Great, thank you.
Chris, would you do for us a summary, please?
Sure, do my
I'm putting you on the
best.
spot, sorry.
As someone that's only been here a couple weeks, I'll have to echo the comments of the others already. That those seem to be common themes. A big focus of our conversation was how do we attract talent? As someone that's only been here a couple weeks, the big thing that was pitched to me was culture. So I think that would be the assumption is that BDO has a better culture than maybe other firms in the same space. When people are brought in here, another assumption is that they're going to be here forever. And that a lot of the structure in terms of training and work paths is kind of designed around someone coming in at an entry-level position and eventually working their way up to director and partner, and not necessarily looking elsewhere and leaving. So we kind of talked about how you would maybe approach that. And one of the topics was rotations, giving people the opportunity to kind of see different areas of tax or audit, whatever group they're in, and kind of giving them that opportunity to change things up on a regular basis so that they can stay interested and engaged over time. And I think that was the main topic. So I'm not sure if I missed
Nice job.
anything.
Is there one other group, Sheila?
Ken's group.
Yeah.
Ken, who's speaking on your behalf?
That whoever was in that group should speak.
Yeah.
I can take the lead and
Or we,
Cindy
or
Paul,
yeah,
if you don't mind, fill in if I missed anything. I mean, some of the same things that have come up already, so I won't repeat other people. The new stuff that I think we mentioned, we talked a little bit about compensation, right? Are we really as limited as we sometimes think we are in what we can offer, how the different levels are bandwidth? Still, we always see a lot of talk from not just our firm, but other firms, people saying how willing firms are to pay people to move between firms, giving hiring bonuses and onboarding bonuses versus are we rewarding the people who are here and got us where we are, and kind of what are we able to do in those constraints to reward our current people? We talked a lot about the whole, working remote, working in the office thing. How do we continue to make that as feasible for our people as we can, give them the options they want, give them the support they need while still making sure it works as a business. So that'll be an ongoing discussion for everybody, and how do we make that the most viable going forward. And then just kind of how we go about attracting new people, right? Are we a little too reliant on kind of the recruiting process and how that goes? I think, Andy, you're the one that said, do we need to think of it more the way we think about business development, as far as just everybody in our office building relationships, having referral sources, and kind of having people come to us or finding people wherever they are out there through that.
That's interesting.
Go ahead through that train.
so Jim, do you want to close? You should.
Yeah,
I'm just watching our time here.
Yeah.
I'm happy to wrap up, and although I may go through this quickly, I don't mean to minimize its importance. We really want to talk a little bit about, what do we do with all this now that we've talked about blockers, either individuals or organizational, and in some cases even industry level blockers to business as usual is what do we do about this kind of stuff? And again, in a 2-hour seminar, it's not like we're going to get down to specific action, but some things you can think about. One that should be painfully obvious right now, given the conversation we have, is step away from the busy, stop the busy. Chris mentioned in one of our breakout groups that prior to his arriving here, he actually had a 2-hour meeting every month with his team to kind of blue sky new ideas, new possibilities. I would just suggest you inventory what people are doing in this regard and kind of build it into your practices somehow. You just have to get started on that and begin to think about, what can I jettison because it's adding little or no value either to the firm or clients. Second thing to do is raise self-awareness, become more conscious of your own assumptions about whatever the issue is, whether it's attracting talent. Some good questions to ask yourself is, and we find in our work that a lot of people make a huge assumptions about where they're really adding value for clients. And it's not, the clients don't see the value in the same way that you think you're adding it. A great question to ask is, and ask your clients is, where are we really creating value and how could we create more? There may be things that you can get rid of as a result of that. And then how do you go about doing what you're doing? So it's not just at the client face, but your management practices, your business practices internally. Ask yourself about those as well. Particularly as a leader, take some risk. I mean, I think Ken mentioned early on that, and Ed as well, demonstrate that that's acceptable. So as a leader in your organization, whether you're an official leader at the top or an unofficial leader in the middle, take some risk, demonstrate it, show that it's okay. And if somebody does take a risk and you have a chance, pat them on the back. So people do feel more comfortable. They get into that top vagal zone that Ken was talking about and feel comfortable offering up ideas. One of the things we think is really important is think like a scientist. So, if you can explain 75% of the variance in some phenomenon, scientists aren't comfortable with that. They start thinking about how can I explain the other 25%? What else is out there? What else might help me explain things better? And they create hypotheses, they test it, and they experiment. This notion of experimentation is really getting a lot of press right now in terms of organization. It comes in the, take a chance, fail fast, learn quickly, don't make that mistake a second time, but don't not make mistakes. So we need to become more curious and ask better questions. As an organization, kind of where we're getting into, just touching the surface on this is really, it's kind of the equivalent of self-awareness. It's organizational awareness. What does business as usual look like at BDO? Be explicit about that. And some questions to ask yourself: what are you doing on autopilot? And why is that on autopilot? Is that really driven by efficiency and it needs to be driven by efficiency, or have we done it because we just have been doing that way since the turn of the century? Where are you the same as the rest of your industry? That's probably an autopilot opportunity to look at too. And really in this whole area is really come back to, this is the value of exploring business as usual. What opportunities and risk really matter? Will we be vulnerable if we're the same as we are now 5 years hence? Foster curiosity and experimentation. A big part of leadership right now. Create the safety that allows people to generate ideas, explore ideas, go out on a limb. The wild and crazy ideas, if they don't manifest exactly the way they're described, they often create other kinds of great ideas. And then reframe mindsets. So as we think about mindsets being nested set of assumptions, beliefs, and biases, again, explicate your prevailing mindset and ask yourself, are those things as relevant today as when I put them into place? And what would I do differently if I held a different set of minds? How would my planning process, my performance management process, my control processes change if I worked on a different set of assumptions? Pardon me for the speed, but we do want to be respectful of your time.
Thanks, Jim. Andy, I know you had some ideas on what you think you might want to do as next steps. We don't have time to go through takeaways, but love to have you share that with the group as to how you envision that.
Well, I think I'm not sure I have all the ideas on that, but maybe a direction that we could take this is really to come up with and focus some of the notes that you guys have taken, and really look at where can we maybe come up with a rock or two around retaining and attracting talent. That seems to be the common theme. Seems to be our number one challenge to growth. So maybe that's and I'm sorry to use a term that our assurance colleagues might not be familiar with yet, but on the tax side, what we've done is that we've created kind of a strategic vision for the tax practice that I know we want to roll out and bring in the entire office. KP has been part of that. But our rocks are basically our goals and objectives and our action steps to attaining goals. And so maybe one or two future goals in this process collectively is for our office to take a look at how do we start to peel back the onion and solve this issue and build some best practices around retaining and attracting people. So that's one thought of what we do with this. Because that will be an ongoing issue for us.
Yeah. And there were two dimensions to that, at least, right? How you source talent creatively, and then how to re-engineer work in a way where you use the talent most effectively, right? That you bring into the organization. So it sounds like a very fertile area to explore.
And we need everybody's creativity and thoughts. I like what you guys, I really like what you said about the process of experimentation and hypothesizing. You know, we shouldn't be afraid to fail at things that we put in place. As long as we're listening to our people and we know it's a fail, then we move on and try something different, right? Not a flavor of the month, but just to continue to learn by the process of experimentation and input from our people.
Yep.
Chris, thank you for the awesome, sharing the awesome idea about blue skying ideas and taking that time out. That's so important to take time out from our busy schedules. It's just not simple. It's not easy to do, but it takes a lot of work and effort. So,
yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was just a great discussion, like to bring kind of that vulnerability and kind of fostering the conversation. And that's what I think our team does really well. And, kind of setting this time aside to have that conversation and dialogue, I think was fantastic. So thank you for helping us with that.
Thank you for allowing us to be part of your day. It was fun to do it with you. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for taking the time out and for being attentive.
Absolutely.
And for providing feedback. I'm really impressed by everyone's engagement and very, very grateful for the time that everyone took out of your busy, busy days.
And
Thanks,
we'll
everyone.
Holidays, everybody.
Look for
we'll
some
send the
follow-up.
slides and notes. We'll send
Yep.
the slides and notes out.
We will. Yep. Along with the survey. Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.